Welcome back, everyone. Knowledge Unbound, episode 10. It kind of hurts a little bit because, I wish we were doing like 15 or 20. But I have something that's going to soothe my pain. I don't know if Ray feels the same, but I told Ray off camera how much I kind of grew up on NPR when I moved to the US. All the programs they had, gave me a different slice of understanding what America was about. And so I'm really, really, truly honored to be joined today as a co-host. Ray Solomon, KUNC 91.5 if you're in Colorado, the NPR affiliate out here. Ray,
KUNC.org if you're not in Colorado.
All right, the website, KUNC.org. I'm going to put that on the Knowledge Unbound website for this episode. Ray, welcome to Knowledge Unbound.
Well, thank you, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, tell us about yourself. How long you been with NPR?
I've been in public radio for about 5 years.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
I started working at KUNC 3 weeks, get this, 3 weeks before the pandemic lockdowns.
Really?
Yeah, so
wow.
It was quite and journalism is a second career for me, so it was quite the introduction to a new career.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Welcome to journalism. Here's a global pandemic. Right. Start writing.
Pretty amazing, yeah.
Yeah, well, through Ray, I was introduced to a wonderful group, and we were very, very, very lucky to have two representatives from that group here today, Greg Spottedbird, and Mariko Rooks, Mariko is a descendant from Japanese who were in a concentration camp here in southeast Colorado, and Greg Spottedbird is a member of the Cheyenne tribe. Massacre that happened in the mid-1800s, 300 killed while they were asleep. Both sides are very near each other, and they've developed a wonderful program called Youth Ambassadors, where the descendants of those incidents are in community with each other. Thank you, Ray, for letting me meet them.
Yeah, I'm really glad that this worked out, because as we were just talking about, it is not easy to get everyone together. And not only are they doing that educational program, but they're doing it on location in very remote southeast Colorado, which, you walk out the door, you look around, there's nothing around here, right? Maybe there's a few fence posts, there's rangeland.
A lot of wind.
A lot of wind. A lot of wind.
Yeah. But
the people at the heart of the story and the people whose histories are in this location, they're not here anymore. So it's really special that we were able to get everyone together.
And just to orient people, sorry to interrupt you, but just to orient people, we are at the Sand Creek Massacre site in the national park. And we did record this podcast live at that site. Ray, before we get into it, tell us a little bit about how because this episode we're doing it because of the story that you did with them, KUNC.org. How did you get onto them and to do that story?
Stories come across my desk all the time. I'm a reporter. I focus on rural issues in northern Colorado. And this came through as just a simple press release that something was happening, that the two communities, Amache and Sand Creek descendant communities, were collaborating on a youth education program. And I thought that sounded really cool. I wanted to be on location with my microphone. You talked about NPR is your introduction to the country. That's the thing that I love so much about radio, and specifically National Public Radio, is the power of just bringing people's voices to the nation. And I just knew I needed to be here on location with the group when they were starting the program. And so I reached out, made my connections. It took a few months. It took a lot of warming up of sources, because not everyone is happy to speak to a reporter.
Absolutely,
especially this day and age, a lot of people are suspicious. So I came out here for the first time it wasn't the first time I was out here, but for this story about a year ago, and reported on that collaboration between the two communities for my home station for KUNC. And then 6 months later, last October, I came back and half participated, half reported on the healing one. And that story is for NPR, for the national network. So I was able to do two stories that I'm really proud of on this incredible collaboration between these two groups.
Well, I hope that you are equally proud of the conversation that we had with them today. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you at the end. Welcome, everyone. I think this is actually our last episode, Segev of Knowledge Unbound. I mean, obviously, I enjoy every episode that I do, but this is pretty special. We're recording this episode live at the Sand Creek Massacre site, national park, but I like to think of it as a memorial site. Couple things. This is a special place. I'm going to get into why it's a special place in a minute. But I'm also joined by a wonderful co-host today from KUNC out here in Northern Colorado. You can get it on 91.5. Ray Solomon. Talk to us.
Hey, Brian, it's good to be here. I'm glad that I was able to bring you out here.
So I met Ray through a mutual friend, and Ray actually, just full credit to Ray, she's the one who put me onto this story. She did a wonderful profile of a wonderful group called Amachi, and we have guests from this project on camera today, and they'll tell you more about it. Mariko Williams. What did I get called?
Mariko Rooks.
Wow. So 3 times I say your name. Will you ever forgive me?
Third time's the charm.
Third time's the charm. Okay.
Yes.
Well, in my defense, I always have my guests introduce themselves.
Okay,
So I should have even tried.
We
So
can
why
go
don't
ahead
you
and
use
take
that
it.
as your intro? Mariko Rooks, tell us about yourself.
Hello, my name is Mariko Fujimoto Rooks. I am a Black and Japanese descendant of the Amachi concentration camp, which was one of 10 total concentration camps or prison camps that Japanese Americans were sent to during World War II. And my grandfather and my grandfather's family were at Amachi, which is only about a 40-minute drive from the Sand Creek Massacre site. So we have had the real honor of working with survivors from both communities to form a new program that engages our youth and teaches them more about their shared history and encourages them to take stewardship over their places, their healing, and their thoughts for what they want to see at these places moving forward.
Thank you. Greg?
Yes. My name is Greg Lamebull. I'm Cheyenne. I'm Sutta. I am a direct descendant of the events that happened here at Sand Creek. More specifically, my family comes from the Dog Soldier and the Warriors camp that was actually 15 miles north of here at the Massacre site. I've been involved with the youth and teaching for around 15 years. I've been involved with Sand Creek since around 2004. I actually did the story on the opening of the National Historic Site when it opened up a few years later than that. So I've been involved quite a bit here at the Sand Creek Massacre site with National Park Service, Library of Congress, and the Sand Creek Massacre Foundation. And I'm now the National Chair of the Sand Creek Massacre Foundation. So we do a lot of work for that. And again, we do a lot of work for our youth, continuing to tell the story of the Sand Creek Massacre, which is important, and keeping that alive. And as the ancestors were being run down, they told the ones that were running, that got away, never to forget them, so we won't forget them. And this past year, we worked very hard on a curriculum that met the standards of the school system here in Colorado. It was passed through legislation, and we took that and presented it at the NCSS in Boston this past year, and it was approved on a national level. So now it's in 36 states in the country and 3 countries around the world. Wow. So that curriculum about the Sand Creek Massacre is in the classroom now for the first time in history. Wow. So
I feel like there are 3 stories here, and Ray, please interrupt me at any point. I promise you I'll not be offended.
I think you're right. 3 stories sounds about right. Yeah.
Well, so, and tell me if I'm right about this, right? There's the massacre, there is the internment camp.
Incarceration camp, yes.
Correct, concentration camp. And then there's a program that you all have created where you have the descendants of both groups
Yes.
talking to each other.
Yes.
I would like, because the audience may not know of either of the 3, of any of these 3. So I would like either of you to maybe start by just summarizing. Ray?
I was just going to say, it might be nice right now to set the scene. What does it look like? Our listeners aren't here, they don't have our view. I think it's nice to sort of set the scene and then walk through that history. So we're on the eastern plains, the southeastern plains of Colorado. It's pretty remote out here.
3 hours from Denver.
3 hours from Denver. Pretty windy, grassy
Beautiful,
plains. Absolutely beautiful, grassy plains. And if we're gonna zoom in, there's the Sand Creek, which is a creek, and at this big bend in the creek, if we zoom in a little bit further, Greg, I want you to take it from here. What happened?
Right.
Okay, so we were promised a place of peace, a place where, if you heard me speak this morning, a place where our people would finally be able to stop running. Entire generations were running for years, for generations they were running from attacks. So they told us to move to this place. You know, as you can see right outside here, the creek bends. And in that bend, there was multiple camps of Cheyenne and Arapaho. And the southern part, southeastern part was probably the setting of the Arapaho camp. And then you went into Lone Bear and, you know, Black Kettle's camp and White Antelope's camp, and they went further into the bend. And on the north side of that was the horse herds, the pony herds. So that's where they moved us here. To us, it wasn't the most beautiful place to be because we came from mountainous country, very green and a lot of water. And then they move us here, as they did to a lot of tribes, a place where you can't grow corn, you can't grow a lot of the vegetables that we used to eat. You know.
This was the early 1800s.
Yes,
Okay.
1864
Okay.
to
So
be
yeah,
exact.
okay.
So they moved us here, but we were happy because we were told we were going to finally be at peace. And they gave us a flag and even a white flag because they were so afraid of being attacked by soldiers. And that flag was supposed to give us a peace of mind that we wouldn't be attacked or we wouldn't have to worry about those things that like I said, we spent years running from to try to avoid confrontations with the troops, you know. So we were safe here. But like we was talking about earlier, this place is really desolate to us, you know, very little water sources. And if you look at the creek now, it's pretty much dried up. So it wasn't very much different back then. And of course, the winters here from Kansas on over this way are pretty harsh. And the event unfortunately took place during the winter months, you know. So it was really harsh for our people. But again, we survived in those elements, as we were always known to survive in a lot of different places. So that's where we are right now at the Sand Creek. And I'm going to let Mariko talk about what was right down the road here, because that's the event following Sand Creek. So
Quickly before we pass to Mariko, so we had the pleasure of, you gave us a brief tour of the actual site
Yes.
of the massacre. My first time being there was a very solemn experience. I did notice the geography, right? So the bluffs. And you pointed out where the troops came from.
Yes.
So if my memory serves me correct, where they came from, it would have been difficult for you in the creek, for the people in the creek, to see them coming.
Yes.
Did that play a role in the amount of people who died in that massacre?
It may have played a role, but the majority was just at being attacked while they were sleeping, you know, being attacked at dawn. So a lot of them weren't even able to get out of their lodges. There were a few stories about people that saw the troops coming. As I was talking to the students earlier, the horse herds, of course, were on the northern side and where the bluffs were. So they were able to kind of see a little bit of the approaching troops coming to the camp. So they were able to hurry up and run into the camp and try to warn as many people to come. But by the time you run down in those bluffs and you reach the camp, they were already here, you know, and they didn't waste no time attacking. Right. What they did do was take off their coats, but we can get to that a little further on. But you know, that was something that was really surprising to a lot of people. Shivington made them all take off their coats, and then they attacked. But yeah, to answer your question, you know, it was more being asleep. They attacked at dawn, so pretty much the entire camp was asleep at that time.
Thank you.
So.
All right.
And so with the removal of Cheyenne, Arapaho, and other indigenous people who called this place home, there suddenly became this pretty remote, pretty desolate area where there weren't too many people who were living. And after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in World War II, that sort of kicks off U.S. involvement in World War II. The U.S. government, and this is largely driven by farmers' associations who are deeply threatened by Japanese Americans who have found success farming land, especially land that other people cannot grow crops on, in places like California, Oregon, and Washington. And so, less than a week after Pearl Harbor happens, you have this delegation that goes to the White House and says, I think that, all of these Japanese people who are living on the western coastline, that's the coast that's closest to Japan, we think that they could be enemy spies. And the U.S. is looking for someone to blame. They're looking for a place to put this public outcry. And the two other people that are fighting in this war are ethnically European, but racially white, right? And so
Italian and German.
Yeah, Italian and German. And of course, there are sanctions put in place on those communities. There are leaders in those communities who are also imprisoned. But what we see in the Japanese American community is that pretty much every single Japanese person who lived in the exclusion order zone, which was most of the West Coast, which is again where people have these more prosperous farms, where people have these established communities in different cities and different towns across sort of the Western coast. Every single person is told to pack only what they can carry, that their land is no longer going to be theirs. They have to sell all of their possessions, all of their belongings, and they're first held in these different racetracks and horse stalls that are on the West Coast, and then they are trained out to these different remote camps, the farthest away being in Arkansas, and one of them was Amachi, which is very close to here. And so Amachi's in the town of Grenada, which is very close between sort of the Colorado and the Kansas border. And these people had no idea where they were being sent. They had no idea really sort of what they were being charged with. A lot of our leaders in the community were snatched and taken to even more intense federal detention centers. And so you had entire families, entire communities who lost the heads of their families for the duration of the war. And they were sent here to where all the land had been cleared. So all of the, the grass and the beautiful sort of shrubbery that you see here today, that we've had the honor of hearing Greg talk about the different kinds of medicine that come from this land. All of that is raised out. And so it's just dust and pretty much nothing but dust. And military barracks are set up for over 1,000 people who now are living here permanently for the duration of World War II. And that site is, again, pretty close to here, but you don't have the place to put our people without the sort of the genocide of the settler colonial genocide of Native Americans first. And something that I mention a lot, and I think is really important to note in this context, is that a lot of the people who are running the War Relocation Authority, which is the department that's in charge of forcing all of these Japanese Americans onto these prison camps, are taken directly from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So they're the same people who have been managing all of the eviction and genocide of Native Americans, they say copy paste, to our people. And there are actually a couple of camps where they're taking Japanese labor and using it to build reservations for different Native American tribes.
In Colorado?
Not in Colorado,
Okay.
but in Arizona, I believe, and some of the other camps. Someone will have to fact check me in post, there are multiple reservations where Japanese Americans go in and they do all the labor to build the infrastructure. They're paid prison wages to build reservations for Native Americans. They're paid to create irrigation systems where there is no water and where the federal government is struggling to bring life to the land. And they build these, and then right after World War II is when different tribes are moved in. So we actually do have camps that are on tribal land for that reason. And even in places like Colorado where that doesn't end up happening, there are just so many different links through these different federal government infrastructures and these ideologies of displacement and of containment that connect our two peoples through these sites of incarceration.
So we have the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864. 80 years later, almost 80 years later, Japanese families are incarcerated nearby in the same southeastern pocket of Colorado. And then about 80 years after that, your two descendant communities start to get together and collaborate. Can you tell us about that? This is the third story that you were describing.
Well, That's a very, very interesting story, We started to visit the site, and, I met Mitch and Derek, from the Amachi. They're
Mitch is the president of the Amachi Alliance, which is a group of community stakeholders. It's a nonprofit group and is primarily led by descendants of survivors at the camp. Derek is also on the board, and they've been really great in getting this program started.
Yeah, and they kind of heard me speak, and I was told I speak really. I have a powerful voice, and I'm not really sure how true that is, but they heard me speak at some point. And we started to talk, and actually some of our board members actually started to visit the Grenada site. One of them actually, Mr. Hamilton, found out that his family tree connects with Grenada, the Amachi site. So they were talking about 3 years ago, and our students started to kind of look into a mirror almost, like, hey, this was done to us too. So it was like looking into a mirror with their trauma and their, the way they saw things, And they said, well, why don't we get together and form a group, the Amachi Alliance and the Sand Creek Massacre students, and they formed an ambassador, the youth ambassador program, which we have now, and we're going on our second year, and so telling the stories and knowing how much the government wanted to erase these things in history, what can we do about that? And of course, here at the Sand Creek Massacre, we fight all the time to get our voices out, to get those stories out. And my involvement in this organization came from me opening my mouth and speaking out against people telling our stories. And I was almost advocating against, why are you telling our stories? Why are you out there telling our stories when you got people like myself, Rosalie Tallbull, all these elders, Karen Littlecoy? I could go on for a long time listing all these elders who have stories of their own to tell about the Sand Creek Massacre. And then we find out they have stories. And this year we brought some elders out, and one of them was Mabel Morimoto.
Sugihara, who's a grandmother of one of our ambassadors.
Yes, and she was a prisoner when she was 2 years old at the camp. So she was a survivor that actually got to be with us this entire weekend and tell her stories and sit in our teepee with us at the events that we had. We had 2 programs over there, and then of course today here at the Sand Creek Massacre. So all these years later, we come together and we're finding out more and more about what they try to take from our people, the culture, the stripping of our religion, our spirituality, our way of praying, the way we look, the way we dress, the way we ate food, even to come and to know the stories over there at the Amachi site. They took everything from them, and just like us, save the man, you have to kill the Indian, and that's just not a way we want to remember those people. So we're working really hard to bring back those stories. We're diving really deep into the elder stories and the stories that we're trying to find them and locate. And we're hunting down all these stories that were meant to be told, and our youth are doing something about it, and they're going to stand up. And we have to set examples as educators, as leaders. I always say that certain things in history didn't let that happen, but the story's still here. And we're finding them, and we're trying to keep that alive. We're not going to forget those people. The other day was really powerful for me when I stamped a book at the prison camp.
Yeah, so, I can talk a little bit about that.
So it was really powerful for me because just like us, we're not going to forget our people. We're not going to forget those people that went through those times, And so we do our best to bring their voices out and tell our stories. So that was really something for me. So.
Can you clarify what that means, to stamp the book?
Absolutely. So when we talk about sort of how did this program come to be and the longer history of Japanese and Asian American activism, there have been a number of concentrated efforts by descendants at the national and also at the local and regional levels to recognize and to rectify what happened to our people. And so the most famous legally is the Redress and Reparations campaign that was executed throughout the 1970s. The government tried to deny that the concentration camps existed, and our elders didn't talk about it, right? It was a source of deep shame. It fractured a lot of our families. It really destroyed our...
in one way.
So I think a big one is that the Ise, or the first generation, were not allowed to become U.S. citizens. So their children, the Nise, are citizens. And so when they get into camp, the Ise are not allowed to work. They're not allowed to hold any roles of respect or importance. And they're also, families are being split up. Everyone's eating in communal dining halls. There's no privacy. So there's a lot of community building, but there's also a lot of destruction of family structure. And the Nise, some of whom are children at the time, they either don't know how to articulate what's happening, or they don't want to talk about it again. It's so shameful to lose everything, to sort of experience that level of social death. And of course, some people also don't survive the camps, right? For a number of different reasons. Health conditions are extremely, extremely poor. Everyone is malnourished. Everyone has a lot of respiratory issues from all of the dust that's being kicked up, and there's no good healthcare. And so when they come out of the camps, right, there's this huge pressure to survive. Some of it is also to assimilate, to deny or to suppress Japaneseness in order to stay safe when they're coming back to these communities where people are chasing them out with guns and graffitiing and destroying their houses and property, when people refuse to give their homes back to them. And so as the next generation, the Sansei, get older, they're sort of saying, what happened to our parents? What is this? What is this trauma that we hold? And they start getting loud. And so legal reparations is a big part of that. And it's been a huge role of ours and an understanding of ours that engaging with other communities, including indigenous communities and also the descendants of Black enslaved folks, to advocate for reparations is something that we must do as Japanese Americans for many different reasons. But there are also a number of different commemorative projects that have come out of wanting to understand and to hold space and to never forget the people who were incarcerated. And so this is a long intro to this book. But one of the really...
It's a book, so...
It's a book. So one of the most important projects that's come out of this is the Ire-cho. And Ire means to console the souls of the dead. And this is a book of every single person who was incarcerated during World War II. And there are over 120,000 names that are in this book. Wow. And it's organized in order of age. So you have the oldest people first and the youngest people who were born right before camp closed in the back. There are 2 huge volumes. And in each cover of the book, there is a ceramic plate that's actually made by the parent of one of our youth ambassadors that holds sand and soil from each of the camps. And each of the relocation centers, and so that was sort of formed into part of the cover of this book. And so there has been a couple years long project now where if you are someone whose family was in camp, or if you were in camp, you can actually go and stamp their name in the book. And if you come to visit the book, it was on display for quite a while at the museum in California, the Japanese American National Museum. It's now going on tour to all the different camps. You can also take part in that stamping process. And so our group was able to do that on Friday. And so we had folks in our group who were able to stamp their relatives, and then also folks stamp the names of people who maybe don't have relatives to stamp for them, or their relatives may not know that this book exists. And so that is one of the really important acts of remembrance that has been engaged in these last few years. And all credit to Reverend Duncan Buchanan Williams, who is a really impressive scholar and Buddhist sensei who has really marshaled this work forward. And so it was such serendipitous coincidence that he happened to be here this particular weekend at this particular pilgrimage when our group was also sort of set up and ready to go. And so I think it was a really meaningful experience for everyone involved.
I mean, I'm glad you gave all that background. I think everything was necessary.
I mean, without that, we don't even have our program, right? There's so much work.
And it made this stamping on the book story, process, very understandable. You wanted to ask a follow-up?
I wanted to go back to something that Greg mentioned when you were talking about how you entered this collaboration, this like educational collaboration. You said that you found that people were telling the story incorrectly, and I think you were implying that it was people outside of your community were telling the story.
That's what I took.
Yeah, I was hoping you could elaborate on what you meant by that, and then like what it means to.
Okay, yeah, for
take on
so
this
long,
type of
and you know, I spoke with Eric during the time they spent with our youth. I believe it was yesterday. They had a session with the National Park Service, and you know, some of the stories are not what we were told by our elders, and you know.
Like the official national park.
Yes.
narrative.
So some of the ranger stories that are told to the public. For example, Ouachita Massacre site, Oklahoma. They tried to cushion the stories about the massacre there, almost justifying what happened to my students. And we had a camp there, and it fell into place because I was like, wait a minute. And they's like, why are they saying things like this, you know? I said, well, let them talk. So we spent the day with the Rangers, and they did and then that evening we brought in our elders, and they told that story. So I said, do you see, you know, why it's important for us to get involved, for you guys to get an education and follow, you know, what we're trying to do, and get into the system. The National Park Service, they need our people in there, you know? So a lot of the stories that we hear aren't the stories that, and they, again, it's that getting offended by, hey, you're telling my story. You're telling my grandmother's story, you know? How do you know about her? How do you know about this? How can you really feel what it means to be a descendant of something that happened like where we're right now, the Sand Creek Massacre? You have no idea what that feels like. So again, I got involved by merely opening my mouth and speaking up, like, you're not going to tell my story anymore. I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to go find you someone who's going to tell you a story about this too, that's related to it, you know. So it makes it more meaningful because, again, when I ask some people, where did you hear that? Oh, I heard it when I was in college, you know. I took a class over it. I read this certain book, you know. And my stories weren't from that. My stories were at, like I almost say, it was at our dinner table with my grandmother sitting right there crying as she told the stories. It was at our campfires, you know, with old men and old ladies sitting there telling the stories, and you could see them cry when they would talk about the children that were massacred, the women that were massacred, the way they slept with their moccasins on for the rest of their lives because they were scared of being attacked in the middle of the night. They never slept in comfort. They slept with their clothes on because of the fear of being attacked, and to see their tears and their emotions. And then my grandfather being a dog soldier and being of the warrior camp, descendants of that camp, seeing his anger about the decisions that were made here by our own people, you know, that made me want to get involved. It made me proud of who I was, you know. And then the more and more I got involved here, and I was like, wait a minute, we need to tell those stories. You guys don't need to be telling our stories, you know. And there's people out there who can tell them stories. You guys need to just go out and find them, or let me do it. And I got involved, and they's like, well, why don't you come out here and be, you know, a part of this program? And then I ended up being just on an advisory board. Then I became a board of directors member, you know. So I was trying my hardest, and now, you know, it's up to like, well, we're trying to bring people in like the youth ambassadors who can carry on that, you know, and get involved with the National Park Service at that level, you know, because there's only so much you can do being someone like me, you know. But if I was to be involved in the National Park Service, to be a ranger, maybe one of our tribal members could be telling the stories on these tours that we're having here today, you know.
Yeah, because I think one thing to name is that because there is such a history of displacement at these sites, it takes so much to get out here. And so even though I was able to be involved growing up in a number of different initiatives about Japanese American incarceration, you'd only go to the camp that was the closest to you in California. Right. And so I wasn't out here until, even though I knew this is where we were, I knew very little about this site or its particular history until maybe 2018. And it took my parents taking us on a cross-country road trip from Connecticut to California to be able to pass through here. Even though I have family in Kansas, even though I've been in this region, my uncle lived in Denver for many years, like that's how hard it is to get out here. Mm-hmm. And it has made such a difference to have infrastructure that's built into this program that allows you to come out here for free. right, that has funding, that allows for students to get to these places, that has a van that can drive them, that has someone who can guide them into this, that brings our elders out too, because this is not just a program for youth. We have survivors, right? We have our grandmas who are here too. And so being able to do that kind of work is really critical in order to make sure that the folks who are most affected by this place have access to it, because I do think there are a lot of stakeholders in the National Park Service. What's been huge for us at Amachi has been the local high school in the local community that really care about these sites, that really want to honor them. But you can't do that without continuously engaging and centering the community. That is the reason these sites exist in the first place. And so I think there's been a lot of progress that's been made. And I think that the National Park Service has done a better job of starting to integrate that, but just really important to acknowledge, right, that there are so many different systemic barriers that are in place that need to be broken in order for anyone who is a survivor to be connected physically to this place.
I want to get back a little bit to the education program where you have, well, I guess it's youth ambassadors, right? So I want to specifically get at the descendants of the concentration camp, descendants of the massacre talking to each other. Because a big theme of this podcast is talking to people who do really transformative, impactful educational experiences that are not necessarily bounded by a college classroom or K-12 classroom, right? Education happens everywhere. And what I'm getting from you, that there's something special, there's something specific that happens in that interaction between the two groups of descendants. I would love for you all to, either of you, to maybe talk us through what, I don't want to use the term special sauce, sounds kind of corny, but whatever magic happens in sharing that traumatic history and the new learnings that come out of that interaction.
Right. Yeah. Well, on our part, it was the run that started many years ago. So we started to kind of gather our students up, and of course everybody wants to get out of school or something like that, but we started to do it during the Thanksgiving break, and perfectly in line, it goes into Thanksgiving break, and unfortunately the massacre happened on November 29th. So we would gather our students, and there would be so many that wanted to come, but we'd have them write an essay, and we would gather our students that way. So years and years, like I was talking this today to the crowd, I was like, I've seen so many students grow up in this program, in our cultural program. It used to be the Cultural Heritage Program, the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes, and of course the Northern Cheyenne had their own programs in their schools up there. So that's how we started to gather these students, and we had so many students to grow up in our program, to phase out of school, but continue to be involved. And we got one sitting right next to me. And they became chaperones and educators on our runs, so it just continued. And finally we found the Amachi Alliance, and they had their own group of students.
Tell us about the run. I don't think we covered what the run specifically
Okay, so
is.
along with the story, and it's very, very macabre, it's like the things that happen right outside here, the butchering, and it goes along with that. They cut the fetuses out of the mothers, they cut the female organs out and wrapped around their hats. They cut the chief's head off, all those things that go along with that story. And the troops, after they were done, they went back to Denver, and they tied these trophies onto tied fetuses on their saddle horns, and the scalps and the body parts and the skins and the bones, and they took it all back to Denver. And that route they took to Denver, when they got back to Denver, they had a parade for those troops that came through, and they cheered for the troops, and they all got medals of honor. So a few of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people just started to follow that path as close as they could get to cleanse the blood from our relatives that were taken back to Denver, and it became something bigger. So people started to come and join them, and then it grew from there, and they started to run, and then we formed an actual run from runners and members of track teams in our tribal communities that came out, and they actually ran in honor of the people that had to run out of their teepees and their lodges here at the attack. So we follow that. So we're starting from here at Lookout Hill, where Silas Soul held his men back, and they run out from here and they follow the trail almost 240 odd miles to Denver. as close as we can get to the actual route that the troops went back to Denver. So that's what the healing run was, and we do that as a sense of healing. And if you were able to witness what happened today, you know that the healing is far from complete. The tears fell today. The students cried as they talked to the crowd today. You know, and it just goes to prove that we're far from being healed completely. You know, and so we do this pretty much every year. We're trying to get it back to where it used to be pre-COVID, you know, but we're just now starting. This year was our first run, and our first run, we had the Amachi students with us.
Yeah, so to maybe break down our programming that we've done over the past year, there's the healing run in the fall, and then there's the pilgrimage in the spring. And so this is the 50th total year of the Amachi pilgrimage, which started when descendants just went back to clean up the cemetery. And a lot of the different camps have pilgrimages where you can go as a descendant and learn, you know, this is the barrack where my family stayed, right? Here's records or archival evidence we have of your family. Here's a way to bond with your family members, right, about this experience. And so our first program was that, so that's where all of our youth ambassadors met last year. And we did a lot of time where they sort of got to know each other, learned about different family histories. We had a pretty wide range. Youngest is 13, oldest is graduating college. And then there were folks like us who were community educators that were sort of brought in. I'm a little unusual because I'm on the younger side of the educator spectrum, so I think this is also a really growing moment for me to learn, like, oh, it's time to, like, your whole life you've been told, like, you know, it's time to step up, right? It's time to, you are the next generation. I was like, oh, I am now, okay, now I have to do it, right? And I think some of the activities that I would name that felt really powerful were dancing together. So sharing each other's different cultural and dance traditions. We both have dances that commemorate and honor our ancestors, our elders, and our legacies. And they're actually pretty similar. They're circle dances. The beats are similar. Some of the drumming is really similar. And as we just started talking and participating in these different activities, you really do, I think, bear a really deep part of yourself when you have to show other people, right? This is where my family was. This is what I don't know about my history. This is what I do. And then for other people to reflect that back to you and say, you know, our story is different. Our relationship to this land is different, but this is also what happened to us. I think really building that relational community structure, and then of course you're together all day in the hot sun, so you really get to know each other super well. And then I think a really game-changing experience for the youth was then they learned how to put up a teepee, and you do it all by hand. There are these giant 18-foot tall poles, and you have to work together as a team to put it up. There are a lot of specific rules that I've definitely learned about how to do this correctly. And so they put up the teepee here, and then we're able to go inside and start really talking and sharing stories. And I think that space is so powerful for this program. There's always a lot of crying. There's always a lot of ceremony. And there's always a lot of both intention setting. We'll name at the beginning of the program, like, what are you thinking about? What are you bringing into this space? And then when we leave, right, what have we learned? What are we reflecting on? And so we do that. And then they did that their first round last May. We then went on the healing run, and nothing will bond you like running 35 miles across Colorado in 3 days. There's hail, there's rain, you're all in this van, and you're on these farm roads, these dirt roads in the middle of nowhere, just with these people and just doing these sort of acts of remembering and healing, to get to be in ceremony, to understand, you know, we wake up at this time, right? These are the rituals that we do in the morning. These are the rituals we do in the evening. Getting to meet other Cheyenne youth who were from these different places in Oklahoma and Montana. So that's the program Greg was talking about, right? The broader tribal program. I think that was really meaningful. And during that time, our group loves to create cranes. And you grant 1,000 cranes to someone if you make 1,000 paper cranes out of origami, which is Japanese folded paper. It used to be like superstition was to grant a wish, but after one girl who was a survivor of the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki made 1,000 cranes while she suffered from leukemia that was induced by the bombs. She made 1,000 cranes as a teenager in hopes of promoting peace, and she passed away. And so since then, it's now a sort of memorial act and a solidarity act that we will engage in. So there are celebration acts of 1,000 cranes. You'll make them for someone's wedding to wish them good luck, but there are also the 1,000 cranes that we will send to border and detention camps along the US border that we will lay at these different pilgrimage sites when we come back that our students and our youth will make. And on this healing run, our program made 1,000 cranes that we ran with. So we were running with some of the cranes, and then that were presented to the tribal elders at the end of this to say, like, this is what we did, right, during this process. This is how our community is going to honor and remember you. And also presenting those cranes to Silas Sewell's descendants, leaving them at his gravestone. So I think it's those kind of embodied acts, right, that are both calling from these deep traditions of cultural practices, but also sharing them and making them our own, right, in this moment or in these sort of spaces, and doing so respectfully, doing so with a lot of dialogue, with a lot of learning. We were able to hold a Buddhist memorial service inside the teepee this year, and I think that's the first time anyone's ever said that sentence, right? But even that has been a process of, right, me going into the teepee and being raised very, very Buddhist and seeing, like, okay, these are the rituals y'all have. What's similar here, what's different, and then asking a lot of questions and being like, so am I allowed to do this? Can we bring in this? Is this okay? Is this not okay, right? And why, right? And so learning more about that and learning more about that culture, and then, I think same thing on our end, and pulling those things together to start to create these new community building rituals and these new learning experiences that connect both. So I think you're both building curriculum, but you're also building culture and you're building meaning as that's happening. And I think our youth drive a lot of that process, right? We can put them in the teepee, but we can't make them talk, right?
But they do talk.
But they do. They do. They are
so engaged.
They are fantastic members of their community, and I think it's getting this kind of singular experience that makes that happen. I don't think any of them take it for granted, and I think that they have all found or developed their sort of different callings or their ways that they want to engage with the community moving forward. And it's beautiful and wonderful to see kids who didn't speak. I'm thinking about Mo. Did not speak a single word for last year at this event, but are giving speeches to crowds of hundreds now, right? While they're sharing their stories.
Gives them a voice almost.
Exactly, and then so many of them have been practicing traditional art forms, and so to be able to link those art forms to these processes of remembering really deliberately across cultures is really exciting. So that's, I think, my team is building out a lot of that for the next year. Right. Or even things like, so Amachi is actually the Japanese sort of fudge name of a Cheyenne woman who Greg can maybe tell you more about, but figuring out the correct pronunciation of that name and then assigning it meaningful Japanese characters is a project that we'll be working on this year, because we do have the characters that represent the camp, which are sort of based on the pictograms for town in Japanese, but how do we do that in a way that is correctly pronouncing and honoring, right, the name of this woman who probably no one knew how to pronounce their name when they landed here, but they said, well, this we can pronounce in Japanese, and we can't name it Grenada because the post office already named that. So doing those kinds of experiences, or starting to develop those for ourselves, of saying, like, right, we want to make sure this is pronounced correctly, but we also acknowledge, right, that Japanese people were here too, right, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I was looking to talk a little bit about the educational meaning, or just the significance of being able to do these programs on site. Mariko, you were talking about, this is a legacy of displacement. This is, the result of all of these experiences of your communities, is that your communities are no longer in this space. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about, like, why that's such a meaningful program to come back here and to witness, the Amachi community witnessing the Sand Creek space, and the Sand Creek community witnessing the Amachi space.
I would say on my end, I think number one, physically, you can really feel it, and you can't release it until you get to this space. There's an element of, whenever I drive out here, at a certain point, I can feel my body start to tense and lock up. Or even when I fly from the East Coast, I will, like, wake up in the middle of the flight when I pass by around where this camp is located. And, we know from sort of different research in biology and in physiology and in psychology that there is a deep and embodied aspect to the trauma that we experience here. And that is carried epigenetically and intergenerationally. And, You know it when you get sick and you're not sure why. You know it when you're stressed about things that people aren't stressed about. You see it in the habits, right, that our elders have developed,
Yes.
and just the perpetual fear that they've lived in. And from what we know of their stories, we definitely understand why. And it wasn't until being able to be here, to be able to cry here, to be able to be in community on site and say, like, oh, I get it now. This is where you were living. This is what it feels like to breathe in the kind of dust that you had to breathe in. This is what it feels like to be so far from home, that you can't. I think everyone has a different journey towards healing, but fundamentally, this is something that can't be replicated, in any other way. And then to be able to learn from the people who are the actual original inhabitants of this land. This is how you care for the land. This is how you treat the land. This is how you heal with the land, is knowledge that I think is really missing from our community because, of course, this is not our land, right? And so I think for me, doing the run last year, I did personally, I think, a little over 13 miles. And to be able to run the path that like my ancestors were not allowed to run because they were not allowed to leave, to run back to Denver, but to do it in a way that sort of honored the fact that like they weren't allowed to leave because people were forced to leave first. I think the changes that I could feel in my body and my emotional state that have really carried on and that continue to carry on throughout this programming, I think feels really strong and really powerful. And I just don't think you get it until you're here. Right. And so I think that's felt really important to me, and we're always in a process of constant discovery at Amachi as well. There's fantastic archaeological teams that are able to connect, this one story or this one photo we have with evidence on site of, this is the plant that was here. And so you can start to form these stories and you can start to develop these sort of deeper understandings, but you can't do it until you come back on site and you're like, yeah, here's this one random photo we have. And they're like, based on these foundations and this cactus and all this other stuff, like you'll see this happen in real time. And so I think being able to do that, and there are no distractions. There are no other places you can go. There's only like a Sonic drive-through, so
therefore there are no places you can go.
So therefore there are no places you can go. So you really have to sit here and you really have to feel it and you really have to move through it. There's no escape, and there's also, thankfully, for the most part, no one telling you like, why are you doing this instead of something else? Like, why can't you just let it go? What does it matter? You're successful outside of this, yada, 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 right? And so I think, for me at least, that's what I felt, and I felt really grateful and honored to be a recipient of some of the knowledge that I think has really helped heal this land and our relationship to it.
So I know you will have to, you've been generous with your time. I know both of you have things to be at.
Yeah.
So I want to, if it's okay, I can ask you one more question. Greg, I want to start
Yes.
with you to get you all here on this one. You touched on this sort of public-facing component of this. I know the program is a little new, right? But I was really happy to hear about the acceptance of the curriculum to the 6 states. To me, that's kind of huge. I was happy to hear about the response of the park rangers when you pointed out, like, can you bring in actual elders to tell these stories? Tell us a little bit about what you think the rest of the country has to learn from this process and what you hope to see going forward. If we came back and ran this podcast 10 years from now, what is sort of the pie in the sky dream for this? And this is not me saying your goals have to be to educate every single citizen, right? But we see the impact. We see why this is important. And I'm sure you do too. I'm sure this is a conversation you've had internally, probably with each other. Tell us a little bit about what that conversation is like.
That is huge for us right now. We do this because we have to tell the people in this country what this country was built on. And that's the genocide of my people. That's they tried to wipe everything clean. They bulldoze where her ancestors were put. They don't want nobody to know what happened here and the truth about this country. And there's one person sitting in a seat right now who's trying to do his best to make sure that's going to be accomplished here. But we're going to make sure that never happens. And if we lose these stories, and if we don't have voices in 10 years from now, our people are going to perish. We're not going to have any identity. We're not going to be identified as Cheyenne people, Arapaho people. That has to be known. And the teaching of the history, the true history has to be told. This is indigenous land. And I said it today, it's indigenous land. All you non-tribal people out there, and to put it in a nice way, you're on indigenous land. And I will say everybody's welcome, but not everyone belongs here. And it's important for us to get those stories out, and for this younger generation to know the stories and to be passionate about them, to be proud of their identity. So in 10 years from now, they're going to be here telling this story like we are. I may be gone by then. The elders are surely going to be gone by then. And who's going to tell the story? Who's going to have that passion, the way we talk and speak to crowds like we did today? They will hopefully have that passion. They'll hopefully have that pride inside of them to speak as we spoke today, and to instill that knowledge into the people that come to visit this place. And they will take it home with them, and they'll know. And the curriculum, I hope to have every state have that in their classroom from 10 years from now. Yes, so that's our hopes, and that's what I pray for. And 10 years from now, that this alliance and our coalition will grow into something that we can't imagine right now.
Yeah, I think on our side, there is a fundamental obligation to building programs that are engaging with other communities that have suffered the same kinds of oppression, and that that we can build solidarity with. And it is incredibly important because the quote-unquote success, right, of Japanese Americans, and I say large quotes because number one, ignores a lot of folks who don't look shiny and pretty on the outside, and who are still going through immense impacts of this experience on the inside. Number two, because economic mobility, class mobility, really important, obviously, right, for surviving in the current society we live in, but are used and weaponized against indigenous people, against black people, against brown people, to say like, the Japanese Americans went through this, and look at them, they're so successful, right? Why can't other groups do this? And that, which we call the model minority narrative, and it's one of the most damning and harmful narratives, one, to our own community, because it does not heal us, right? It only hides the deep and long-lasting impacts of what we've been through and what we continue to go through, right? As people of color in America. And number two, in doing so, further oppresses every other group, right? Who didn't get the chance to go to college using the GI Bill after being forced into the military, right? Who didn't get the chance to buy our own property. When we hear the stories from Cheyenne folks who are saying like, certain levers of oppression that like we were able to assimilate out of and they weren't, right? It is our job and our responsibility to not be pulled into this deeply harmful fantasy of what it means to move past or move on, right? And I think what this program shows us is that it takes time. It takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes dedication to move through instead, and that you cannot do it alone, right? And that every single one of our cultures that they've tried to destroy, we have all kept something. We have all fought for part of that culture's survival. And by putting those pieces that we have in conversation with each other, that's how we can become more whole, right? That's how we can heal ourselves. That's how we can connect to other communities. That's how we can engage with, sort of the oppression and with the discrimination that still continues to impact us today. And so I think when I think about this program in 10 years, I think my hope is that the roots that we've planted now lead to long-lasting relationships and sustainable relationships with this land and these places, and that these relationships bring others in, right, throughout both of our communities as well. And so I think a question that Greg has asked a lot, particularly this last weekend, is, how are you going to be a good ancestor? And so I hope that in 10 years, some of our youth can have some more clear answers to that question, because they've been getting to practice what that means through programs like this.
Ray, we're here because of you.
We're here because of Greg and Mariko and.
Well, I mean, you invited me here,
Yes.
so that was.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you, Ray, for running with us with your camera and your mic.
Yeah.
You really earned our respect for that one.
It was an honor and a privilege to cover this story for NPR. It was one of the most beautiful stories I think I've ever covered, and I thank you guys for letting me letting me have that privilege.
And thank you for letting me have them on the podcast. Greg, Mariko, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Best of
Brian.
luck. I'll be back before 10 years. I mean, I know the question was 10 years, but I'll
Yeah,
be
you gotta
back
come out and
before
run
that.
with us.
I will. No, that
Yeah.
I want to do.
Yes.
That I want to do.
Yes.
All right, thanks so much. You can cut.
Thank you guys.
Hey ya ya hey ya 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 hey ya hey ya hey ya ya hey ya hey ya hey ya hey ya hey.
Knowledge Unbound is brought to you by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, Open STEM Education. We are graciously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Special thanks to producer Segeva Masai. He wasn't on camera or on mic today, but he is here. Thanks to the co-host for today, Ray Solomon, 91.5 KUNC here in Colorado, KUNC.org. If you're not here, Ray, how was that episode for you?
That was wonderful. It was so cool to come back and hear the final thoughts and sort of a little bit of a follow-up a year into this program that I've been reporting on for quite some time.
Well, I was intrigued about the 10-year question, right? The last question. And I do want to come back and do the run. That's actually a serious promise I made to them. But I'm also so interested in how the lessons from what they're trying to do here can expand beyond the program itself. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, the program is called the Youth Ambassadors, which is something that has always intrigued me. That the idea is, it's not just to educate the kids, the youth, they're not kids, they're youth, who come out here and get this programming firsthand, but they're supposed to be ambassadors to go out and share this with the community. I think that's something about these stories, these particular stories that are so powerful. Greg was talking about when outsiders tell the stories, they miss a lot.
Right.
They're not authentic. And when it's transmitted orally from the source to the source to the source, I think these kids become the next source going out to the world. And that's something I'm really excited to see what happens next, because the next part of the project is the kids do the youth. Not kids, the youth.
I understand the temptation.
I know, it is so tempting to just say kids, but especially at my age, everyone younger than me is a kid.
We are the same age, right?
I know, so you know what it feels like.
Right.
But the intention is to do a number of projects to transmit this to the next, transmit this to a wider audience. So I think Mariko was talking about some folks are working on like a dance project.
Right.
I was talking to one of the coordinators about an interest in making a podcast project that I would be so honored to support and help them with that, since that's my specialty.
Yeah, and and hearing them talk about what they're doing with the youth, it's like they're teaching them to reflect, and they're teaching them the value that reflection brings to their own understanding of themselves, right? I just want to take this time to thank all the listeners to this wonderful podcast, to the last 10 episodes for season 2. Thank all the guests who took time to talk to us. Thank you, Ray, for joining us on this last episode. And I do believe that this interview was the episode to leave this season on, in that the power of reflection, the power of memory, and the power of talking to each other is something that we so desperately need right now in this country. That I hope you take this into your classroom, into your profession, into your summer, into your next academic year. I love you. Thank you for tuning in. Be excellent to each other.
If we lose these stories, and if we don't have voices in 10 years from now, our people are going to perish. We're not going to have any identity. We're not going to be identified as Cheyenne people, Arapaho people. That has to be known. And the teaching of the history, the true history, has to be told. You know, this is indigenous land. And I said it today, you know, it's indigenous land. All you non-tribal people out there, and to put it in a nice way, you're on indigenous land. And I will say everybody's welcome, but not everyone belongs here.
There is a deep and embodied aspect to the trauma that we experience here, and that is carried epigenetically and intergenerationally. You know it when you get sick and you're not sure why. You know it when you're stressed about things that people aren't stressed about. You see it in the habits, right, that our elders have developed,
Yes.
and just the perpetual fear that they've lived in. And from what we know of their stories, we definitely understand why. And it wasn't until being able to be here, to be able to cry here, to be able to be in community on site and say like, oh, I get it now. This is where you were living. This is what it feels like to breathe in the kind of dust that you had to breathe in. This is what it feels like to be so far from home. I think everyone has a different journey towards healing, but fundamentally this is something that can't be replicated, you know, in any other way. And then to be able to learn from the people who are the actual original inhabitants of this land. This is how you care for the land. This is how you treat the land. This is how you heal with the land, is knowledge that I think is really missing from our community because, of course, this is not our land, right?